Lightning split the night sky as flames swallowed the east barn, smoke curling like a noose above the ranch. Soaked and breathless, Clayton Ramsey dropped to his knees beside the woman he had once mocked, now unconscious in the hay, her scar bleeding, her hand limp in his. For the first time in his life, the feared cattle baron didn't command, didn't curse. He wept, cradling her like something fragile he was terrified to lose. But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. In the blistering sun of 1883 Texas, where the land cracked like parchment beneath boot heels and the air shimmered with dry heat, Clayton Ramsey reigned like a king over red dust and horned cattle. His ranch sprawled across acres of parched earth, guarded by barbed wire and the pride of a man who had never bowed to anything but death. And even that he resented. His hands were calloused, not from labor, but from tightening reins and clenching fists. He was a man of sharp lines, in his jaw, in his rules, and in the judgments he passed on others without blinking. He'd built his empire not on patience, but dominance. Every man on the ranch knew when to lower his eyes. Every beast knew when to yield. And yet, as the coach carrying Eleanor Whitmore rattled up the dusty trail toward the main house, Clayton felt something close to unease, a feeling he buried under contempt the moment he saw her. She stepped down from the carriage, her boots touching Texas soil like it meant something. She wore no veil, no finery, no attempt to soften what nature, or misfortune, had carved into her face. The scar ran jagged from beneath her left eye to the edge of her chin, an ugly truth that refused to hide. Her dress was plain muslin, wrinkled from the journey. Her hair, pinned tightly, refused to catch the wind in any romantic way. She looked at him, calm, unreadable. Clayton's lip curled before his words even formed. "So this is what I'm marrying?" he said, loud enough for the ranch hands to hear. Laughter murmured around him, cruel and uncertain. "My pa thought scars make a woman noble. All I see is a burden I didn't ask for." But Eleanor didn't flinch. She didn't touch her scar, didn't avert her gaze, didn't even blink. Her stare met his with the force of something unspoken, an ancient kind of defiance that didn't need armor or voice to be felt. It rattled him, and that made him angrier. He barked at one of the stable boys to show her to the north guest room, the coldest in the house, drafty in winter, stifling in summer. He told the cook not to waste the good meat on her, and in the days that followed, he avoided her like a sickness that might spread. He didn't yet understand why her silence made him feel exposed, why her presence, without asking, unsettled the throne he thought he'd secured. But he would. Clayton Ramsey prided himself on knowing every inch of his land, every man who rode under his brand, every crack in the barn beams. Eleanor remained an anomaly, a grain of grit in his tightly ground machine. He had expected her to wither in the heat, to cry, complain, or sulk in the cold shadows of the guest room. Instead, she rose before dawn and laced her boots tighter than most men did. She didn't ask permission. She didn't wait for instruction. She grabbed a feed pail like she'd been doing it all her life and moved among the ranch hands with the assurance of someone who'd long since stopped caring about whether or not she was welcome. She mucked stalls in silence, sleeves rolled high on her freckled arms, never flinching at the filth or the sweat. She pulled her weight and more, handling cranky bulls and fevered calves like they were made of the same scarred tenderness she carried across her jaw. And though the men had chuckled at first, at the oddity of a bride wielding a pitchfork, they soon shut their mouths and started nodding when she passed. A few even offered her a second biscuit at breakfast. Clayton noticed, though he told himself he didn't care. He watched from the porch, a half-lit cigar forgotten between his fingers, as she bent to inspect a sagging fence post or whispered to a spooked colt in the corral. She had a way of moving like she didn't owe the earth a single apology for existing. And one evening, as the horizon burned orange and the cicadas struck up their buzzing hymn, he found her in the round pen with a wounded mare. One the stable hands had warned was too jumpy, too far gone to be of use. Eleanor stood in the dust, her hand extended, palm open, her voice so low it barely reached him. The mare trembled, then stepped forward. Clayton didn't mean to stare, but he did, long enough for her to notice. "You don't have to like me," she said without turning. Her tone was even, calm, too calm. "But I'm not here to please you. I made a promise to your father, and I keep my word." For a moment, he had no retort. His jaw tightened, the muscles ticking in irritation, or something dangerously close to confusion. Clayton Ramsey could command herds and men with a snap of his fingers. But this woman, this strange, steady presence in his home, met him not with rebellion or fear, but with something far worse for a man like him. Indifference born of strength. And he didn't know what to do with that. The wedding had the weight of obligation rather than celebration. The chapel pews were filled with dust-coated ranch hands and a few somber townsfolk, all murmuring behind gloved hands. No music played, no toast was given. Clayton stood at the altar like a statue carved from pride and resentment, his eyes hard, his jaw locked. When the preacher muttered, "You may kiss the bride," he gave a curt nod and turned away before Eleanor could even glance up. But that night, the heavens refused to be still. The wind came first, pushing against the wooden walls like an angry ghost. Then came the thunder, a deep growl that rattled picture frames and spooked every horse in the stable. By the time lightning forked across the sky, blinding white and jagged as a whip, a scream rang out from the east barn. "Fire!" someone shouted. "Lightning hit the hayloft!" Clayton bolted down the hallway barefoot, not thinking, just moving. When he reached the porch, he found Eleanor already there, drenched to the bone, her eyes fixed on the distant orange glow. Neither spoke. They ran. Side by side, they tore across the yard, rain lashing their faces, boots slapping through mud. The fire had already consumed part of the roof. Horses thrashed and screamed inside. Together, they hauled buckets in a rhythm born not of trust, but necessity. Her skirts heavy with water, his shirt clinging like second skin. Neither stopped. Not when embers stung. Not when the smoke clawed at their lungs. Not even when the roof groaned, threatening to come down on their heads. When it was finally over, flames drowned, animals freed, men coughing in the soot-choked dark, Eleanor collapsed, her knees giving out in the hay. Clayton caught her by instinct, not choice. She was limp, her breath shallow. Blood trickled from a small cut on her temple, mixing with rainwater. Her scar, always silent on her face, now looked like a wound freshly earned. He knelt beside her, breath heaving, hand trembling. Something inside him, some long-forgotten tenderness buried under years of command and cruelty, rose without permission. Later, back in the house, she lay on their marriage bed, unmoving but breathing. He sat beside her, the storm still rumbling in the distance. "My ma had that same scar," he whispered. "Horse kicked her. She was trying to save its foal. She said it made her brave. I mocked you because I saw it. My shame in you. That wasn't fair." His voice cracked. Then, without dignity or restraint, Clayton Ramsey cried. He buried his face in his hands and let years of bitterness unravel. Eleanor stirred. Weakly, quietly, she reached out. Her fingers touched his. Not to stop the tears, just to let him know he wasn't alone in them. The shift was not thunderous. It came without ceremony or announcement, but the ranch felt it. subtle at first, then unmistakable. Clayton Ramsey, once all scowl and steel, began to linger longer at the breakfast table. He asked questions he never used to ask. Did the sorrel mare eat this morning? Or, what do you think of that south fence line? But most tellingly, he began each of these queries with her name. Eleanor. He didn't bark orders anymore. He listened. The hands noticed. They spoke in whispers. The man who once treated silence as a blade now paused when Eleanor spoke, his brow furrowed in concentration, like her thoughts were maps only she knew how to read. They rode together in the mornings, not out of duty but rhythm. One could see it from the hill, the two of them cresting the pasture side by side, their shadows long and easy on the earth. One afternoon, without pretense, Clayton handed her a box, hand-carved, rough-edged, but made with care. Inside, wildflowers, bluebonnet, Indian paintbrush, primrose. I noticed these were the ones you always pause by, he said, rubbing the back of his neck like a boy caught in a secret. Didn't know their names, but figured they mattered. Eleanor looked at the petals, faded, but kept fresh in his memory, and something deep in her, something she thought long dead, bloomed. The town noticed too. Clayton Ramsey's been smiling, said Mrs. Deeks at the mercantile. And it ain't from selling cattle, I'll tell you that. The change didn't soften him. It sharpened him into something more dangerous, more complete. The kind of man who could still wrestle a steer to the ground, but now paused to brush mud off his wife's hem. A year passed. Spring rolled in again, and the pasture returned to green. They stood before a modest crowd, ranch hands, townfolk, even old Doc Hadley, beneath a white arch made from salvaged timber. This time there were no obligations, no inheritance to claim, just choice. Clayton spoke simply, but the words carved themselves into the heart of everyone present. I was blind and proud, he said, but she saw everything, the land, the beasts, me, and now I see her too, beautiful, fierce, and mine. Then he turned, took her face gently in his hands, and kissed the scar that once made him recoil. Gasps broke out like birds startled from a tree. And Eleanor, who had never asked for love, never expected it, smiled through tears, not because she'd been chosen, but because now she was finally seen.